Palisades Village and our events committee. As part of our Artists in the Community series, we have an exceptional treat in store for everyone this evening. Our guest is an award-winning dancer, choreographer, dance company founder, cultural ambassador, first ever Smithsonian choreographer in residence, author, teacher, and our Palisades neighbor. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the poet laureate of Washington Dance, Dana Tai Soon Burgess. Thank you so much for being here, Dana.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I wanted to start out by just sharing a little video of dance so that you can sort of visualize what it is that I do at the Smithsonian when I'm there in terms of like rehearsals and things like that. So I'm just going to share that right now with you. It's very short, and then we can like talk through. So I'm the first ever choreographer in residence for the Smithsonian, and it's been such a serendipitous journey to this wonderful place where I feel like I'm in that adventure movie, A Night at the Museum, because I get to be with the collection when the museum's closed. I get to speak with historians and curators and research different ideas for dances and then rehearse and present them at the museum. So I grew up actually in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the 1970s, and my parents are both visual artists. My father passed away a few years ago, and my mother is 90 and she's still alive, and she makes art every day. In fact, she has an exhibition currently at the Arts Club of Washington, if you want to go see her work, which I'm very proud of her about. So I grew up in a city which was sort of made up of this triad of cultures. The cultures were American Indian or Native American, Hispanic, and Caucasian. And within that, on my mom's side, I'm Korean American. She was born and raised in Hawaii, and my family is part of the first 100 families to come to America and settle down from Korea. In 1903, they came to the Hawaiian plantations on Oahu and worked as indentured servants for the sugarcane and pineapple plantations for 3 generations. And actually, my mother picked pineapples as well. And she was the first person to get out of the islands, come to what we call the mainland, and go to an academy of art called Cranbrook Arts Academy. And when she was at Cranbrook in the 1950s, she was one of 4 Asian American young women that Cranbrook recruited. And at that time period, Cranbrook was the heart of modern expressionism. And so when I grew up, and my father met her at Cranbrook because he also attended Cranbrook as well. So my father was a painter and my mother a textile designer, and now she makes collages and ink, abstract ink pieces. And I grew up every single day watching them, either my mom at a loom or my father at his canvas, just watching art unfold. And I think that that was um, so powerful for me as a child because it has set up the journey of my life. And I often think about this in terms of what are the unrequited dreams of a parent and how are they passed on to a child? And how do we then pick up the pieces and try and make those a reality in another generation? So it only makes sense that I would end up at a museum instead of in a dance studio, in a sense. So when my parents moved to Santa Fe in 1972 from Carmel Valley, I was a fairly young child and I went to public schools in New Mexico. And at that time period, New Mexico had mandatory bilingual schools. So I went to school in English and Spanish, and then I would go home to a very like Asian household that was also biracial. And then I would go to martial arts classes every evening. And there was a dojo just off of Canyon Road in Santa Fe, if you know it, that's sort of like the art gallery road. And on that road was a center called Project Tibet. And inside of Project Tibet was a dojo run by a Japanese man named Makio Nishida. So I took martial arts every night, and in between classes, I would sit outside with all the Tibetan monks, and we would just talk about the world in a sense, and meditation, things like that. So it was very, I think as a child, when I think back on it, like very confusing to figure out where I belonged. And maybe that's not so unusual for biracial or mixed heritage people. But in New Mexico, I think that was exacerbated by also having like Hispanic culture that was like very Catholic and we weren't Catholic, and having Native American friends too, which had a whole sort of like different perspective on ritual and, indigenous spirituality, etc. So the one thing that I learned was that I really excelled within movement, within martial arts. And one day my father said, why don't you go with your friend Salome? And her name really was Salome. This is crazy. And she was a dancer, friend of mine. And he said, why don't you go take a dance class with her? And so I went and took a ballet class with her. And that was that I saw the world completely differently. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. Like I can be an artist like my parents, and I can still move and excel in movement because I didn't have any eye-hand coordination and still don't. I can't imagine how people paint. I'm always like amazed by it, and or take photographs, etc. So that became my calling, and I went to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and there I had some really wonderful teachers who danced for Anthony Tudor, an amazing ballet choreographer, psychological ballets, and also randomly went to an audition today for a man named Tim Wengard, who had just retired as being the main soloist for Martha Graham. And I danced for his company, and he was such a kind person and such a wonderful mentor. And finally, I quit the university early, didn't finish my degree, and decided that I was going to hit the big city. And I came out to the East Coast and danced in New York with several contracts, and then danced in DC with several contracts. And I just fell in love with DC. And so I started dancing for lots of companies here. And it was a huge adjustment because every day was a learning experience. I think about this often, like in New Mexico and Santa Fe, we didn't have buses, for instance. So the first time that a bus drove up, and you know how some buses, they like lower hydraulically so that people can get in. I remember almost screaming and falling over backwards because I thought like the bus was going to fall on me or something. So I had a lot of learning to do. But what happened was that serendipity sort of took over in my career, and I was noticed by several critics, and I decided to start my own dance company and really kind of forge out on my own, because I felt that the stories that I was dancing in other people's works didn't really reflect what my inner terrain was, like what my inner landscape was. So very young, I started a dance company. I got a fellowship to go to graduate school to study choreography at George Washington University. And then I met a series of mentors through the years and dance is a field of mentorship. Like you can't learn it on, on TV or even on Zoom. You can kind of, take a class, but it's very difficult. So, and the mentors that I ended up having were like visual artists like John Dreyfus, who's a sculptor here in the city, Jennifer Tipton, who is a MacArthur Genius Award lighting designer that I worked with. And then serendipitously, I was asked to teach and work in Hamburg at the Hamburg Ballet. And there I met John Neumeyer, who's one of the premier choreographers to this day in Europe. And I was able to learn how to choreograph better, how to teach more coherently. And John's home is actually bequeathed to the city of Hamburg now, because his collection of dance memorabilia is so profoundly important. He has original Leon Basques, he has original Isadora Duncan, paintings of Isadora Duncan. He has incredible original artwork from the Ballet Russe. So it's this profound collection, and at the time he just like lived in the collection, and now he has an agreement with the city of Hamburg, which I still hope is going through after all of our lockdown, that the city will build a museum for his collection. He will inhabit the museum until his death, and then the collection goes to the city. So it's pretty fascinating. But it was so profound for me to be in a home that was also a museum. And I started making these connections when I came back to the States, that I could go to all of these museums for free here in Washington, which is so unusual. And I could learn through just walking down the halls and studying the artists and thinking about how to look at the stage as a canvas. And I realized that I had been doing that ever since I was a child, and that I could excel in that. And I just needed to decipher visual art and make this confluence between visual art and dance. And that's really what I did. And I started to work in museum residencies. I did residencies at the Corcoran Gallery of Art before it was, now it's part of a university. I've done work at the Krieger, done work, of course, all over the Smithsonian. And ultimately what happened was I got this call one day in 2013, I believe, from one of the historians at the National Portrait Gallery named Amy Henderson. And she said, do you mind coming down to meet with me, because we're using one of your portraits for the exhibition, and what the exhibition is missing is dance, even though it's the first exhibition on dance in America. So I said, oh, that's so interesting. So I went down and I pitched to her, let's just put me in the museum as part of the exhibition. If you'll build me a dance studio, I'll rehearse there several times a week and build a dance and start presenting them here at the museum. And that went so well that it became a model for when the new director, Kim Sajet, came in. And she said, let's make this a permanent relationship. And so we put together an MOU. It was vetted all the way to the top of the Smithsonian and back down again. And after a few years, it came back signed, and I became the choreographer in residence in 2016. So my job there is to enliven the collection at the National Portrait Gallery. And as Kim Sajet had said to me when I first came on, she said, we've got this museum, we've got this beautiful collection, but we need to make sure that we create the concept of a living museum into the future. So I said, well, what does that mean exactly, a living museum? And she said, we want it to be so that young people can come in, anyone can come in and feel that it's a place for them, and that all of the portraits, which are predominantly were all, it's so funny, kind of like she said, dead white men, right? It's like all these, she said, there's got to be more than that. And there's got to be a way to connect to their histories if it is just that, So I was really excited about it. And I thought this challenge is going to be great because I love storytelling through movement. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, how it all happened. And so along the way, I think this interaction with the visual arts and dance has been really wonderful for my company, because we don't have to charge tickets for our performances. Now they can all be free at the museum, which is a goal and dream that I had starting out as a choreographer, because the cost of presenting dance is truly exorbitant. And a lot of people don't realize that when you go and see a ballet, for instance, or you see our company at the Kennedy Center, the ticket price that you pay is not even close to covering the costs of the actual production. It's so we rely on government grants and this residence to the museum and individual donations in order to underwrite all that. And I think that allowing free performances just makes me feel really happy that I'm there. So I wanted to show a short little video to kind of explain what I do. I want to show two of those, but I'll stop in between both. So I'm going to just do a little quick screen share. A choreographer is a dance maker. Essentially, it's an individual that utilizes movement of the human body and steps in order to tell a story. And often that story is created with music, with a theme, with costumes. I'm able to use all of those things, create a movement language, and then make a unique dance that I hope people will respond to. My goal as a choreographer is to illuminate the different emotional journeys that we all go on. Movement itself is this fundamental universal language, because we all understand when someone's depressed, or we understand when someone is elated, and we all tell stories of love and of death and of happiness. There's something about the human condition itself all across the globe that understands those stories when told through dance. This work is based on an exhibition, The Face of Battle, America at War, 9/11 to now. And it really focuses on the American experience for veterans. So I was especially moved by the portraits by Louis Palou, whose images of soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan very much showed what a toll that experience takes on an individual. One of the things that became so apparent was just how young these individuals were, and yet how hardened and almost emotionally aged that they looked also. When I looked at the images, spoke to some of the artists, and also took the time to speak to veterans who had returned and live here in Washington, D.C., I realized that a major issue is post-traumatic stress disorder, and how to portray that through movement really became the challenge of the dance itself. The choreography is developed so that it is from the perspective of a veteran who has returned, and he keeps looking backwards into the memory of what occurred while he was abroad. And so it's constantly about this issue of how does trauma attach to an individual, and what triggers an individual's emotional reactions to different situations. For the audience, I hope that they
ruminate on what they've seen, and that they think about their own life cycle, about their own life experiences, and have a sense of empathy to others, and also have an experience which is sublime.
What's really wonderful about being at the Smithsonian is that this particular little short video is part of their digital educational library, which all students across the United States and really in the world can click in and use the materials for research projects, for their classrooms, also for class assignments as well. So there are all these different layers that go along with the residency that I'm really excited about. And one of the other layers that is very helpful for me as a choreographer is that I also look at the National Portrait Gallery as an incubator for my work, because the work can be performed and workshopped within the portrait gallery and then are taken to the Kennedy Center or tour through the US State Department. So I'm going to show an example of what that same work looks like on stage, but just a little different section of it, okay? And we have a question from Hakan. Are those videos available publicly on Vimeo? And yes, I have some video links which I will share afterwards. Why don't I share them with maybe Erica? We can do that offline and get them to people. Thanks for that question. So you can see how a work that is made for the courtyard can translate into being in a theater, and then it changes because you add these theatrical components of lighting, for instance. So it's interesting how they can look very different. Another work I wanted to share with you, which sort of exemplifies the different kinds of works that I make there at the museum, is a little excerpt of a work called I Am Vertical, and it's based on the life of Sylvia Plath. because there was an exhibit called One Life, Sylvia Plath, that came to the museum, and I was just so moved, not just by her writing, but also by her tumultuous life, that I created this work. So I just want to show you a little bit of that one too, because it's one of my favorite works. Sorry, let me try and load that one more time. Not sure what's wrong with it. So one thing that I love to do is play with the idea of how can I um, sort of control the the viewer's eye in terms of when I create dances. So what I love is that um, there's movement, 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 but then I try and create moments that draw into maybe just one single gesture, which then can mean so much, right? And then it sort of then push the viewer out of looking at the microscopic back into the macroscopic of the stage again. And I think that's so important for a choreographer, because if you keep just having like an inundation of movement and like frenetic movement like the whole time, the attention span of the individual wanes, because we're really become interested in looking at form, then looking at detail, then looking at form again. And that's something that I work on a lot. The next work that I wanted to show you a little excerpt from is called Silhouettes. And I'll just show a tiny bit of it, but I get the chance to play with lots of different visual techniques. And this has a projected backdrop by a friend of mine, Kelly Coburn. And this is based on an exhibition which was focused on the history of the paper cut silhouette. So paper cut little silhouettes became very popular in the late 1700s into the early 1800s. And what I learned was that it was the first time that Americans were able to afford an actual image of themselves or loved one, because only the 1 percentile wealthy were ever able to afford the commissioning of a major portrait. And I found that really fascinating, this whole idea that there was this little black and white relationship of image. And I thought a lot about what that meant psychologically, to the concept of the shadow self and the light self as well. So I played a lot with those ideas. So I'll just show you a little excerpt from that. So I think you get the idea. The dancer makes a silhouette, and then there's a projected silhouette as well. So I liked that idea of playing with this black and white psychological world where certain characters might be internally not necessarily good characters, but lurking characters within our psyche as well. And finally, I wanted to show you just a couple of other maybe I'll just show like one more excerpt, and it's from a recent work that I made called A Tribute to Marian Anderson. And I made this work right before we went into lockdown, actually. It premiered last February, and Eleanor Holmes Norton presided over the opening of the show. And it's dedicated to the opera icon and civil rights icon Marian Anderson, who was not permitted to sing at the Constitution Hall, DAR Constitution Hall, because she was African American, and instead was allowed by Roosevelt's wife to sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, which is this historic, wonderful moment. And so this is a work which is dedicated to her, and also our songs by Brahms, which were from her original playbook.
The work I'll be sharing with you is entitled A Tribute to Marian Anderson. It's a suite of dances, danced to Brahms, sung live by Millicent Scarlett, with accompaniment on the piano by Dr. Jeffrey Watson. The work is based on the life of Marian Anderson. Specifically, it is meant to be a suite of dances, which is an elegant tribute to her life and legacy. She was born on February 27, 1897, and passed away on April 8, 1993. The music critic Alan Blythe said her voice was a rich, vibrant contralto of intrinsic beauty. She performed on the best stages of the United States and Europe between 1925 and 1965. But perhaps one of the most important concerts she gave was an outside concert on Easter Sunday, April 9th, 1939, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. She sang before an integrated crowd of more than 75,000 people and a radio audience in the millions. In 1939, the Daughters of the American Revolution refused permission for Anderson to sing in an integrated audience in Constitution Hall. The incident placed Anderson in the spotlight. The First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, and President Roosevelt created the outdoor performance opportunity for Marian Anderson, and it changed history. She became an icon of not just opera, but also of the civil rights movement. In creating this work, I wanted to make sure that it was of elegance, because Marian Anderson was of such high professionality, high skill as a singer, and of such elegance that that is how the work is created. The costumes are by Sigrid Johannesdotter. The lighting is by Felipe Oyerson.
wanted to just share those few works and talk a little bit about what I do, and just ask if you have questions, because I'd love to talk to my neighbors and answer any questions that you might have about dance, about choreography, about choreographic inspiration. So feel free to just shout out.
And I'd like to ask you a question about the music. At what stage of the creative process? Is that the early stage, the later stage that you choose the music?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like this is just on an aside, one thing that I feel very frustrated with when I see like younger choreographers now, their works is often they're not musical, and it just drives me a little crazy. But I do a lot of different searches for music, and I try and have them be thematic to the time periods and the individuals that I'm making works about. So, for instance, the Sylvia Plath work are all modern composers that were alive when she was. So they're all from like that same time period. And so I just did like a whole search and worked with a curator as well. And I have a person on staff with the dance company who I ask a lot of musical questions to and will do musical research for me. And then I just go through and I start trying to figure out whether how to piece all the music together, so that just like a book, you have symbols that can be recurring, you have phrases that start to make more meaning, and you can build those out almost as chapters that build to thematic crescendos and decrescendos. So sometimes you have to kind of like bring different pieces of work together. One of my favorite pieces of repertoire is called Confluence, and it's by Ernest Bloch, the Hebraic Suite. And that one is very interesting because his works build so perfectly for choreography. There's certain composers that are just like that, where the tempo is correct, the mood is correct, and you just know you can work with it. And others, you just know you'll never make a dance using this composer's work, So I try and veer away from electronic scores, although I used to use them a lot in the past. I've recently been very interested in classical compositions or chamber compositions. And I start using the musical score early in the process, right? I might not have decided which pieces I'll use exactly, but I'll experiment with different pieces, even in the first 2 or 3 rehearsals, because I want to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. And a lot of times the music will predicate how the movement itself is going to develop. It's an interesting symbiotic relationship.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I have a question, if you don't mind, Dana. It's Kate.
Sure, Kate.
So I'm very interested in your seeking out, or whatever, you collaborate with different museums. I love that. I know Amy Henderson, and I know John Dreyfus is actually one of my husband's best friends.
Oh,
Back to kindergarten, if you can imagine.
Oh,
But
I
I'm
love
curious, because I personally am very involved with the Freer Sackler, now the new National Museum of Asian Art. Have you ever considered doing anything with the Freer Sackler?
Well, years ago, I did several concerts there. We did this beautiful outdoor concert outside of their steps. We had a stage built, and then they commissioned, gosh, I know this is crazy, but it was like in 1995, they commissioned a work of mine, and we put it in the Meyer Auditorium. But since then, what's interesting about museums is that it has to be the right grouping of people to believe in the performing arts, because the performing arts necessitate a different platform, right? So one thing, like as I was building my career, I remember I would go and I would talk to curators, and then I would have these funny conversations and say, like, I can see this work is really inspiring me that you own in your collection. Could I just make a work about it and just, I can even dance it somewhere in the museum? And I had several curators say like, are you kidding me? Like, what if one of the dancers like kicks it over and like breaks something? Like, it's never going to happen. And then I had a couple historians I talked to and they said, oh, well, you can't use that space because then they're going to have to move the bench, and the person that has to move the public bench is a different part of our structure that I don't report to, and that would take an internal memo, which might take like a month to be able to like move. So, so the institutional structures are not built for that, right? But I remember I started having breakthroughs when I would say to curators, well, a dancer spends their whole life knowing their body and knowing space. So if you want somebody not to knock over a sculpture, you'd want the whole museum to be filled with dancers, right? And so like so the conversation moves slowly. And right now, I would love to do another work at the Freer Sackler Asian Art Museum, but they have sort of been in transition for a while in terms of leadership. So maybe with the new director, that could possibly happen. And yeah, so I would love that. That would be so fun.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear that. Yeah, Lonnie Bunch taking over the head of the Smithsonian, and
Oh,
Chase
great.
Robinson, the head of the Freer Sackler. I think it's a new day there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be involved. So I see you in the courtyard, and I'm going to look forward to seeing
Oh, I
your
love that.
company perform there in the courtyard.
Oh my gosh, will you email me and we'll stay in
Okay.
contact and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out because I love that courtyard. It's fabulous. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
Anything else?
Oh, I'd like to know when you are out, when you want to fill some dancing positions, just put out a call and how available, are there a lot of people in Washington who are just into dance and waiting to come to a call for auditions?
That is a great question. It's fascinating because the days of open calls, except if it's sort of Broadway, might not exist anymore. And the only reason I say that is that a contract in dance is like so difficult to come by now for a young dancer. And the way that choreographers, even if they do have an audition, find young dancers is that those dancers are like committed to like taking their company class or taking their dancers company classes, or there's this relationship that's already built. So for me, I have a lot of dancers that will contact me, send me their resume, say, when are you auditioning again? I love your work. But then when I ask them, what performance did you come to? It's like, oops, they didn't really come to a performance. They just saw something online. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's going to work because you've got to like see something in person, right? So those dancers that like contact me and show up and I feel like they have a great personality that'll get along with the other dancers, what I'll do is I'll invite them to take company class when we have an opening, and I'll ask them to take company class for like 2 or 3 weeks before I make a commitment. Then I start them out as an apprentice and then move them after a month and a half to being a full company member. And the reason being is that we're in our, oh my gosh, 28th season now. And one of the things that I've learned is that one bad apple can spoil the bunch. And so you want to make sure that even you get to a certain point where all professional dancers can kick their leg and all professional dancers can like do, triple turns and all this, right? But you need to have in a company dancers that get along and dancers that are smart. Because as a choreographer, I rely on those dancers to also be creative and to be thoughtful in their interpretations of the movement and to understand what I'm saying, right? And so it's kind of I guess I would say it's a long engagement before the marriage happens. Yes. Oh, I think you're on mute. Are you on mute? Let's see. There you go.
I'd like to go back to your comments on music again. I would think that the music would be so important for telling the story that it's hard for me to imagine choreography taking place before the choice of music? How do you?
Right. Yeah,
Please.
right. For me, I'll have maybe 10 pieces of music that I go into the studio with in advance of starting the rehearsal process. And once I go through the first maybe 3 rehearsals, I would have narrowed that down to the music I'll be using. Because sometimes what happens is listening to a piece of music at home, for instance, or listening to several pieces of music, what I visualize in my mind in reality can't happen, or somehow it doesn't look right on the dancers. So there's this weaning out process that for me happens in the first 2 to 3 rehearsals. But it also might take 45 rehearsals to make, or maybe 50 rehearsals to make a half-hour work. So in looking at it, it's not that much time that I'm not having the music decided. Mm-hmm. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I like your question. Another question?
Well, this has just been sublime, and I think we're all just kind of awestruck, Dana. Oh, there's Elaine.
Question.
Yeah.
Where you have your own company, and where do you recruit your dancers?
Sure. So I've had my own company for 28 years now. And so we've had many generations of dancers. Our dancers traditionally stay on average 10 years. So they'll spend like most of their life in the company. And for a choreographer, that's really important because whenever you lose a dancer, you lose institutional history. When you lose institutional history, it costs a lot of money, right, to replace that, a lot of rehearsal hours. So I look everywhere for dancers. When I was in Chile on tour, there's a young man that you saw in several duets with a beautiful Filipino woman, and his name is Felipe Oyarzun. And when I was in Chile teaching at the University of Chile on tour, I saw him and he said, I want to dance in America. And so we sponsored his visa and he came to America and trained with us. He's been with us like 8 years now. So we have dancers from all over because we tour a lot, but also I look for dancers that have a ballet background as well as a modern dance background. And I look for dancers that also have one other dance form because I'm interested in that. And I'm looking always for a dancer with a culturally specific dance form. So like Joan Ayap also does traditional Filipina dance. Kristen Arthur, who's half Korean, does Korean dance as well. But she also danced for the Korean National Ballet before our company. One of our dancers was the Irish step, this is hilarious, Irish step champion for the US as a teenager who represented the US for the major international championship for step dance. So, there's always something that I'm looking for that adds another layer to the movement that I can pull from, but also expresses them as individuals because I think that America is so diverse, right? Like look at us all tonight. We're from different places, different faces, and I want the company to look that way as well. Yeah.
And you tour worldwide or only in America?
No, we tour worldwide because I've been a cultural ambassador for the State Department for about, for 27 years now. So every year I'll take on 2 international tours. Like last year was Indonesia, the year before Cambodia. And then those were kind of years of transition because the State Department was having a problem with the administration. But we're hoping to go back to 2 or 3 in the future, which I think we will, because dance as diplomacy is extremely important around the world. I've also done 2 Fulbrights in Lima, Peru as well. So I've spent like a long time abroad in different periods creating work for the National Ballet of Peru and others. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Claudia had a question for you.
Oh,
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, so I was wondering how, I know the pandemic's been so hard for
Yeah.
the arts in general. And so how have you managed to keep your dancers engaged and your creative process going?
Yeah, I love that question. It's through, I think, just creativity, right? And so I Zoom with our dancers, company class, and we do rehearsals on Zoom, which is not my favorite because I can't see very well on my computer screen. And then we do um, limited rehearsals. We do weekly COVID tests, temperature checks, wear masks, and hand sanitize, and work in a studio space that has a hospital grade HVAC system.
Great.
But I'm still only able to work with 3 dancers at the most at the time, and they have to be socially distanced. So it's been a challenge for me. And I think that this time period has been a real moment of reflection, of realizing how blessed I've been in the past and what a blessing it will be in the future to be back working in person with my whole company again. But our board of directors is dedicated to keeping them employed. And so we haven't furloughed any of the dancers. We've kept them going this whole year. And we also are doing lots of different video projects. So I'll just show you one little quick one if that's okay. It's just like a minute or two, and I'll show you what we've been doing. So this is a quick little video example of these little snippets I'm able to do, and this one's based on John Singer Sargent's work. So I'll just like show that to you real quickly. So we've been working on these video projects that also are still inspired by great works of art. And I'm a big fan of John Singer Sargent. So, and that whole time, but I thought the whole idea of making a duet with the, the sort of World War I gas mask and the last pandemic sort of made sense to where we are today in our masks.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Sure. Thank you.
Is there time for one more question?
Oh, yes, of course. And I'm going to put our website in the chat too.
This is Dan Lozier. I just wanted to ask sort of a process question. When you have an idea for a new dance and you have to present it to your dancers, how does that go? How do you present the first idea to them and then begin to develop the choreography to go with that? I assume it's a collaborative process, but could you describe that a little bit?
Oh, sure. The dancers always laugh a little bit in this process because I think I'm very communicative, but I end up being very quiet in rehearsal because I think I go to another side of my brain or something. But I'll have ideas and I have specific imagery. I know where I want to go in the dance. And so I'll send out little information packets to the dancers. I'll send out information packets. I just sent out a whole bunch. For instance, I'm doing a new dance about Iris Campbell, who was was an African-American pilot during World War II. So I just sent out a packet about his life and his history to one of our dancers so that he could just better understand the time period, the context, and information about that character. And then we'll have moments kind of halfway, midway through the process where we'll sit down and I'll say, this is working, this isn't working. I see the character is this way, or you need to project in a different way, and this is why. So we have ongoing conversations about it. And again, that's why this whole idea of a choreographer is constantly in search of a smart dancer. It's very important because they're going to have to interpret and add to their role as well. And I have to say, Dan's my across the street neighbor. He's a wonderful neighbor. So
Yes.
Thank you.
I had one slightly maybe off-beat question, but you mentioned that you discovered your gift of movement when you were doing martial arts as you still see any kind of connection between martial arts and dance?
Yeah, I see it every day. And I think for me, I studied ballet, I studied modern dance, jazz, etc. But it's sort of the thing that I look for in other dancers that I hire now. It's that third component. And martial arts is a movement discipline of its own. I mean, you learn to be on time, you learn to perfect the movements. And there's something that I used to compete in the Southwest called a kata, or a form. And there are these whole sections of repeatable movement. And they're like dances almost that you can compete in. And I always excelled at that. So I think for me, my first solo dances that I was ever sort of in, or first audiences I ever had, were because I was doing martial arts. So there's a lot of connectivity to it, and also the circular quality of how you move and the focus that's used. I think that has served me so well on stage, for instance, and being able to coach that, looking far, looking close, actually seeing another person on stage, almost an opponent, because the dancer has to believe so much that they are in a different world. They are almost like a shaman in terms of going into this other place that they visualize in this other character, so that the audience believes it, so that they can cast a spell over the audience. If they cannot do that, if they waver in any way, or it's like when you're watching a show and you see that one dancer who's focused and all of a sudden they do a little lizard eye, because they don't know if they're in the right place, and you go, oh, that just ruined the whole thing, because they've broken that magic. And I think that's that magic of focus and belief in fighting the unseen opponent is what dance is in a sense. Great question. I love that question. Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, Dana, we've gone over our time because we just can't get enough. And
Oh, that's so sweet.
it's been a
Well,
splendid evening.
oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I love all my neighbors. It's just wonderful to see you all. And I am going to communicate with Erica so that I can get you some information about our website. There's a documentary on the front of the website that you might like. And I know that I'll be speaking to Janet about the Arts Club and others of you about other things. So I look forward to seeing you around the neighborhood. Thanks so much. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
We're
so
fortunate
much,
to
Dana.
have you in the neighborhood.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you, Dana.
Bye.
You made it a great night.
Bye.